The man had been overseas for over a year, serving in a faraway country, far from the comforts of home. His days were filled with duty, routine, and the distant hope of returning to his peaceful life. His wife, back at home, had kept things running, sending him letters and messages, telling him about the small things. The garden they had started, the neighborhood gossip, the simple joys of their quiet life. The man couldn't wait to come back and finally relax, to enjoy the calm, to hold his wife, and to be in the place he had fought so hard to protect. When he landed back on U.S. soil, the weight of exhaustion lifted from his shoulders. He had missed the smell of fresh air, the sound of birds chirping, the familiar sights of the town. It was good to be home. He couldn't wait to see his wife, to embrace her after all this time. His mind raced with plans for their reunion, quiet dinners, long walks by the lake, and maybe even taking a vacation to get away from everything. But when he finally reached his home, he was met with an unexpected shock. There, on the doorstep, was a thick envelope with the HOA's official logo printed on it. The man's heart sank as he picked it up, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Inside, he found a letter, a cold, formal notice. As he read the words, the world around him seemed to freeze. The HOA had sold his property. Without his knowledge, without his consent, they had taken control of his home. Worse, they planned to build a new development on the land, 120 luxury cabins. The plans were already in motion. His heart pounded in his chest. He reread the letter over and over, each word sinking deeper into his gut. How could this happen? How had the HOA been allowed to do this while he was away, without even notifying him? His wife had been trying to stop it, but the letter made it clear. She hadn't been able to stop the machine that was already moving. The letter went on to explain that the property had been sold to a development company, and the new owners were moving forward with the construction. His home, his peaceful life, was now being torn apart for the benefit of strangers. The man's hands trembled as he placed the letter down, his mind racing. He walked into the house, his eyes scanning the empty rooms, now cold and unfamiliar. He could hear the echoes of his past life, but it felt so distant now. The house was no longer just his home. It was a symbol of the betrayal he felt. He had been defending his country, serving thousands of miles away, and this was how they had repaid him, by selling the very place he had worked so hard to protect. It didn't make sense. The wife had tried to stop it. She had called, written letters, and fought for their rights, but no one had listened to her. The HOA had ignored her concerns, brushed her off as just another homeowner with complaints. She had been left to fend for herself, and now, the man realized, he was the one who had to fight for their future. As he stood there, his mind clouded with anger and disbelief, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his wife. He answered immediately, desperate to hear her voice. "Hey," she said, her tone hesitant. "I just saw the letter." She trailed off, unable to continue. "I can't believe this is happening," the man said, his voice thick with frustration. "They've sold the house. They're building cabins on our land. Why didn't anyone tell us?" "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been calling the HOA for months. They ignored me. I went to the meetings, but they just brushed me off. They said it was all part of the plan. They never thought you'd come back and fight it." He took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I'm going to make them regret this," he said, his voice full of determination. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hopeful but cautious. "I'm not just a homeowner, and I'm not just a soldier. I have connections, power that the HOA can't even begin to understand. They've messed with the wrong person." He paused for a moment, thinking about the resources he had at his disposal. "I'm going to use everything I have to take back what's ours." His wife was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing his words. Then, finally, she spoke. "I'll stand by you, no matter what. We'll fight this together." That was all he needed to hear. He wasn't alone in this anymore. They were a team, and no one, not the HOA, not the developers, would take away their home. The man looked out the window at the land that was once his. He had been trained to fight for his country, but now, he was going to fight for his home. And he was going to win. With a renewed sense of purpose, the man hung up the phone and turned back to the house. The fight had just begun. The HOA had made a huge mistake by selling his property while he was away, but they hadn't realized something important. They weren't dealing with just another homeowner. They were dealing with a soldier. And soldiers never give up. They fight until the end. The man couldn't believe what had just happened. He had been so focused on his return, so eager to come home to the life he had worked so hard for. But now, that life had been ripped from him. The letter from the HOA weighed heavily in his hands as he paced the room, trying to make sense of it. His mind was racing, the anger bubbling up as he thought about how they had taken everything from him without so much as a phone call. How could they do this while he was deployed, while he was serving overseas, without any regard for his rights or his family's well-being? He thought of his wife, alone in their home, fighting a battle no one had warned her about. She had called the HOA multiple times, gone to meetings, and tried everything to stop the project. But her efforts had been in vain. The HOA had brushed her off, ignored her concerns, and now they had stolen their home. The man clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He couldn't stand it. He needed to act. This wasn't just about a house or a piece of land anymore. It was about respect. It was about justice. And it was about showing the HOA that they couldn't just walk all over him, or anyone in this neighborhood, ever again. The man called his wife, his voice now calm but firm. "I'm coming over. We need to make a plan." "I don't know what to do," she replied, her voice a mix of frustration and helplessness. "I've tried everything. I don't know where to turn anymore." "We're not going to let them win. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. The wife hung up the phone, and within minutes, the man was on his way to the house. As he drove, he began thinking about the resources at his disposal. He wasn't just a homeowner. He wasn't just someone who had lost his property. He was a soldier, and soldiers don't back down. He had connections, people he could call on for help. He thought of his military contacts, the officers he had worked with, people who had the power to help him reclaim his property. He had always been there for his country, but now it was time for his country to stand by him. He knew the HOA wasn't just going to roll over, but he had a few tricks up his sleeve. He wasn't going to let them get away with this. When the man arrived at the house, his wife was already waiting for him. She looked exhausted, but there was a new fire in her eyes. She wasn't going to give up, not now, not when they were so close to losing everything. He walked up to her and hugged her, the weight of the situation pressing on both of them. "We're going to get our home back," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I won't stop until we do." "But how?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have the money for lawyers, and the HOA has already started building." "I'm not going to fight them with money," he said. "I'm going to fight them with everything I have. And the HOA has no idea what's coming." The wife looked at him, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've got connections. People in places they can't touch. We're going to take this fight straight to them. And we're going to win," he said, a sense of resolve building in his chest. "I'll use everything at my disposal to stop this project. The military, the legal system, anything I can get my hands on." "But what if they don't listen?" she asked. "What if they just go ahead and keep building?" "They won't," he said confidently. "I'll make sure they know they can't just do whatever they want. I'll make sure they understand who they're dealing with." The wife nodded, her eyes filling with a sense of hope she hadn't felt since the letter arrived. "So what's the plan?" "I'm going to start with the HOA's development permits," he said, pulling out a folder from his bag. "I'm going to find out everything about this project, who they've bribed, what loopholes they've exploited. And once I have that, I'll go after their funding. I'll use everything I can to make sure this development doesn't happen." The wife sat down, the weight of what they were about to do sinking in. "You really think we can stop them?" "We can, and we will," the man said. "We're not just homeowners. We're a team, and I'm going to make sure the HOA regrets ever trying to mess with us." As the man looked out at the property they had once called home, he felt a wave of determination wash over him. The HOA had made a mistake by thinking they could take his land, his home, without facing any consequences. They had underestimated him, and they would pay the price. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a man who had everything to lose, and he wasn't going down without a fight. The next steps were clear. It was time to use every resource, every connection he had, to take back what was rightfully his. The battle was just beginning, and he wasn't going to stop until the HOA was forced to give up. The fight for his home, for his future, had just begun, and he would stop at nothing to make sure he won. The man knew that the HOA wasn't going to back down easily. They were too powerful, too entrenched in the local community. But he wasn't the type to give up. He had spent years in the military, fighting for his country, and he wasn't going to let some corrupt organization take his property without a fight. He had connections, allies who were more than capable of helping him get what he needed, people who respected him and his mission. The next morning, he made a series of calls. He knew exactly who to reach out to. His military contacts were scattered all over, and each one of them owed him a favor. He wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for help, to use his resources and his network to reclaim what was rightfully his. The first call was to Captain Jameson, an old friend and former superior officer. Jameson was stationed at a nearby base and had always been a man of action. He picked up after the first ring. "Captain Jameson," the voice on the other end said. "It's been a while. What's going on?" "Jameson, I need a favor," the man said, not wasting any time. "I need to mobilize some resources, legal and logistical. The HOA has stolen my property, and I'm not about to let that happen." There was a pause on the other end, but Jameson quickly responded. "Sounds like you've got a mess on your hands. What do you need?" "I need to get my hands on the right paperwork, access to some legal channels, and maybe some muscle to back me up," the man replied. "I need to make sure the HOA knows they've picked the wrong fight." Jameson didn't hesitate. "You've got it. I'll get the paperwork and send some people your way. You've always had my back. It's time I return the favor." With that, the man hung up, feeling the weight of the situation lift just slightly. He had made the first move. With Jameson's help, the legal side of things would be covered. But he still needed more than just paper trails. The HOA had a lot of power, and it was time to show them that they weren't the only ones who could move mountains. The man's next call was to a retired general, a friend from his past. General Larson had always been a source of reliable support, and now, he was the man needed. After a few rings, Larson answered. "This is Larson. What's the situation?" "General," the man began, his voice steady, "I need a favor. The HOA has stolen my land, and I'm going to take it back. I need your help to make sure they know we mean business." There was a brief silence before Larson responded. "What are you asking for exactly?" "I need you to pull some strings, get the military involved if necessary. We're not going to play by their rules. I'm going to take them down, and I need the right people in place." Larson chuckled softly. "I didn't think you were the type to ask for help, but I understand. You want a military solution to a civilian problem. I can make a few calls, put the pressure on them. You'll have what you need." The man smiled. "I appreciate it, General. You don't know how much this means." The call ended, and the man felt a surge of determination flood through him. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had the power of his military connections behind him, and the HOA had no idea what was coming. The next step was to contact a local lawyer, someone who understood the legal intricacies of land ownership and could find any cracks in the HOA's plans. He needed someone who could work quickly and efficiently. He dialed the number of a lawyer he had worked with in the past, someone who had a reputation for handling difficult cases. "Hello," a calm, professional voice answered. "Mr. Thompson," the man said. "I need your help. The HOA has sold my property, and they've started construction on land that's mine. I need you to dig into their legal paperwork, find any way to stop them. I'm ready to fight, but I need someone who knows how to navigate this kind of mess. Thompson paused for a moment, as if evaluating the situation. I'll take a look. It sounds like you've got a real problem on your hands. I'll start working on it, but be prepared for a long battle. The HOA has deep pockets and a lot of influence. I know, the man replied. But I've got the military on my side now. And trust me, I'm not going down without a fight. The conversation ended, and the man felt the pieces of his plan coming together. He had the legal support, the military backing, and a clear goal in mind: to make sure the HOA couldn't get away with stealing what was his. The suspense of what was coming next built with every phone call he made, and he knew the HOA wouldn't know what hit them. With the military on his side, they were about to learn that there was much more at stake than just a piece of land. This was about justice, and he was prepared to use every resource at his disposal to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. The man stepped outside, looking out over the land that had been his, the land the HOA had stolen while he was away. He wasn't going to let them keep it. Not now, not ever. With a plan in motion, he was ready to take back what was rightfully his. The fight had just begun, and the HOA had no idea what they were about to face. The man's plan was set into motion, and now it was time to make his move. The military was already on standby, ready to assist in whatever way they could, and his legal team was diligently going over every piece of paperwork, looking for any cracks they could exploit. He had laid the groundwork, but he knew that the HOA wouldn't back down easily. They were powerful, confident, and used to getting their way. But he was about to make them understand that they had made a grave mistake by underestimating him. The first strike would be subtle, a warning to the HOA that he wasn't just going to roll over. It wasn't enough to just call them out. He needed to disrupt their plans, get inside their heads, and make them second-guess every decision they made. The wife had been his biggest ally, helping him organize the legal and military sides of the operation. She had also been working on the community, speaking to neighbors and rallying them to support their cause. It was clear now that the HOA had not only sold his land but had also affected the entire neighborhood, pushing people around and ignoring their concerns. It wasn't just about his property anymore. It was about everyone who had been wronged. On a quiet afternoon, the man and his wife stood at their front porch, watching as a small team of contractors arrived near the HOA's construction site. They had been told the contractors would begin digging foundations for the cabins. The man had already given orders to the military to delay their work. The military was in charge of managing local operations for situations like this: emergency procedures, roadblocks, and legal enforcement. Their arrival wasn't going to stop the construction permanently, but it would buy the man and his wife time. The contractors were confused as military vehicles showed up, parked strategically around the perimeter of the construction site. They couldn't move forward without clearance, and the man made sure the site was temporarily locked down. As the contractors stood there, wondering what was going on, the wife called the HOA office. She was calm but firm, requesting a meeting with their president, Richard Allen. She explained that there were serious legal concerns regarding the development and that they needed to halt construction immediately. Richard's response was predictable, dismissive. "We've already got everything in motion. You're just trying to delay things. There's nothing to discuss." "You're not in charge here anymore, Richard," the wife said coolly. "You're not going to bulldoze our lives just because you have money and power. You're not going to get away with this." The conversation ended abruptly, but the tension between the wife and Richard was unmistakable. She knew he was angry, but he hadn't realized the full extent of the situation. The wife hung up the phone and turned to her husband, who was watching the construction site through the window. "He won't back down easily," she said. "But we've got the military on our side. We're not just dealing with construction workers anymore. We're dealing with power." The man nodded, the weight of the situation settling in. He could feel the anticipation building in the air. This was just the beginning, and soon, the HOA would be forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. Later that afternoon, Richard Allen showed up at the construction site, his face tight with frustration. He was surrounded by his team of lawyers and developers, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. But as soon as he saw the military vehicles, he paused. The contractors were still standing in confusion, looking at the locked gates and the army personnel blocking their progress. Richard stormed up to the nearest officer, his voice sharp with anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The officer stood firm, offering no explanation. "Sorry, sir. The site is closed for now. You'll need clearance to continue." Richard's face reddened. "I don't need clearance. I'm in charge here. This is my project." The officer remained calm. "Not anymore, sir. The site is temporarily blocked for legal reasons. You'll need to speak with the legal department." Richard turned toward his team, his expression dark. He was furious, but he knew better than to push too hard in front of military personnel. He had underestimated the man, and now he was paying the price. The wife and husband watched from the house, knowing the HOA had just lost its first battle. Richard and his team left the site, unable to proceed with the project. It was a small victory, but it was significant. The HOA had been forced to stop, and the construction was stalled, at least for now. The man stood on his porch, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The first strike had been made, and the HOA had no idea what was coming next. They thought they could bulldoze their way through life. They thought they could control everything with money and power. But they had underestimated him, and they would soon find out just how far he was willing to go to protect what was his. This was just the beginning. The fight had only started, and the man was ready for whatever came next. The wife and her husband stood on their porch, watching the military vehicles slowly drive away, knowing that their first strike had made a significant impact. The construction site was at a standstill, and the HOA's plans had been delayed. It wasn't a complete victory yet, but it was a start. The man knew this was just the beginning. The HOA wouldn't sit back and let this go without a fight. They had underestimated him, but now they had been forced to stop in their tracks. Richard Allen, the HOA president, wasn't the type to back down easily. The man knew Richard would retaliate, but he also knew that they now had a foothold. He turned to his wife, who was standing beside him. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "The HOA won't just give up, but we've put them on notice. They're going to realize that they can't do whatever they want anymore." The wife nodded, her face resolute. "They think they can push us around, but we're not backing down. We'll use every resource we have to make sure they know they've messed with the wrong people." That evening, the man went over their plan again, carefully considering his next steps. He had pulled the military into their fight, but he knew it wouldn't be enough just to delay the project. He needed to hit the HOA harder, expose their corruption, and take the fight to the next level. They weren't just battling for land. They were fighting for control over their community and their future. The next morning, the HOA's response came faster than he had anticipated. Richard Allen called him directly, his voice dripping with frustration and anger. "You think you can stop us with a few military trucks and some legal paperwork? You've only delayed the inevitable. We're going to move forward with this project, and you're going to regret ever standing in our way." The man wasn't surprised by Richard's words. He had expected this kind of resistance. "You're out of your depth, Richard," he replied coolly. "This isn't just about a piece of land. You've done something much worse. You've tried to take what's mine without any regard for the law or for the people who live here. You've made a mistake, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." Richard's response was full of bitterness. "You can't stop us. We've got the lawyers, the money, and the backing to push through this. You're just a soldier with a vendetta." "I'm more than that," the man said, his voice firm. "I'm someone who will fight for what's right, no matter what it takes." Richard fell silent, the tension in the air palpable. The wife stood beside her husband, watching him take charge of the situation. She had always admired his determination, but now, as they faced down the HOA, she saw just how deep his resolve ran. This wasn't just about their home. It was about standing up to the abuse of power that had been happening for years. The man hung up the phone, his mind already moving to the next phase of their plan. The HOA had threatened them, but now it was time for him to counteract. They couldn't just rely on military power or legal maneuvering. They needed to make the public aware of what the HOA was doing. The people needed to see that the HOA wasn't the benevolent organization they pretended to be. They were a group of powerful people who cared more about their profit than the well-being of the community. The man and his wife quickly got to work. They began collecting evidence, documenting the HOA's shady dealings with developers, and speaking to neighbors who had been affected by their oppressive rules. They had already built a small network of supporters, but now it was time to expand it. They needed the community on their side if they were going to defeat the HOA. As the man and his wife worked behind the scenes, the HOA continued with their plans, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. The contractors were nervous, the workers unsure of what the next step would be. The tension was building, and the HOA could feel it. Their resources were vast, but now they had a force pushing back against them. Soon, news outlets began picking up the story. Local reporters started asking questions about the legitimacy of the HOA's project, and the press coverage began to turn in their favor. The HOA, which had once felt invincible, was now under public scrutiny. The man watched the news reports with a feeling of satisfaction. Their efforts were paying off, but this battle was far from over. They had caused a ripple, but the fight was just beginning. The HOA would retaliate, and they would need to be ready. The wife looked at her husband, who was focused on the next steps. "We've made progress," she said, "but we need to keep pushing. They're going to try to hit us harder." "I know," he replied, "but they don't know who they're dealing with. We're just getting started." The stage was set for the next phase of the fight. The HOA was reeling from the pressure, but they hadn't yet realized the full extent of what the man and his wife were capable of. The tension was building, and the man was prepared to do whatever it took to take back his land and stop the HOA from ruining his community. The tension in the air was thick as the battle between the wife and the HOA continued to escalate. The man and his wife had successfully gathered support from the community and the media, but they knew the HOA wasn't going to let go of their plans easily. They had underestimated the power of the people and the resources the man could call upon, but now it was time for the next phase of the fight. The wife had called in the military's support to help them with the logistics of stopping the HOA's construction project, and now, the military was prepared to take action. The man and his wife stood on the porch, watching as military trucks rolled into the neighborhood. The sight of the convoy made the wife's heart race, but there was also a sense of calm confidence that settled over her. They had reached a turning point. They were no longer just two people fighting against an impersonal organization. They had an entire force behind them, ready to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The military's arrival was a clear signal to the HOA. They had crossed a line, and now they would face the consequences. The wife had coordinated with Captain Jameson and General Larson, using their connections to mobilize a small group of military personnel who were ready to intervene. This was a strategic move. They weren't going to use brute force, but they were prepared to assert their authority and disrupt the HOA's operations. As the military personnel set up a perimeter around the construction site, the contractors who had been working on the cabins were left in confusion. They had received no notice of the military presence, and now they were uncertain about how to proceed. The wife watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the contractors scrambling to figure out what was going on. They had no idea that the man, once just a soldier, was now using his connections to take control of the situation. It was a surreal sight. Military trucks parked alongside construction equipment, the workers standing helplessly by as the military established a presence on the land they had been trying to develop. It was a quiet, controlled takeover, and the wife knew it was just the beginning. The wife and her husband were about to take their fight to the next level, but they knew that Richard Allen and the HOA were not going to let this slide easily. Richard had already shown his refusal to back down, and now, they were going to feel the full force of his actions. The next morning, the wife received an unexpected phone call from Richard. His voice was laced with frustration and anger. "You've gone too far now," Richard said, his tone barely controlled. "This isn't just a simple neighborhood dispute anymore. You're dragging the entire community into this. You've brought the military in, and now you're interfering with the development of a project that will benefit everyone." The wife didn't flinch at his words. She was prepared for this. "You've always seen this as just a business deal, Richard. You've never cared about the people in this community. You've pushed people around for years. It's time someone stood up to you, and that someone is me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and the wife could hear Richard's frustration growing. "You think the military is going to stop us?" he spat. "You can't hold us off forever. You think the press coverage and your little stunt with the military are going to work? You're fighting a losing battle." The wife's voice remained steady. "I'm not losing, Richard. I'm winning. You can't force people out of their homes and think there won't be consequences. You've underestimated me, and now you're going to pay for it." The conversation ended abruptly, and the wife hung up the phone, knowing that Richard was running out of options. The military presence had been a warning, a powerful statement to the HOA that they weren't in control anymore. As she turned to her husband, who was standing beside her, she knew it was time to keep moving forward. The HOA was rattled, but they were far from done. They would retaliate, and the wife was prepared for whatever they would throw at her. "They'll try to fight back," her husband said, his voice serious. "We need to be ready." "We are ready," the wife replied confidently. "They've made their move, and now we're making ours. We're not just going to stop their construction. We're going to expose them for what they really are: greedy, manipulative, and willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want." Over the next few days, the wife worked with her legal team to gather more evidence of the HOA's corruption. They dug into the contracts, the financial backers behind the development project, and the permits the HOA had pushed through without proper consultation. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about exposing the entire operation for what it was: a money-making scheme that ignored the needs of the community. The military stayed in place, ensuring the construction site remained blocked off, and the HOA's contractors were left scrambling. It was working, but the wife knew they had to keep up the pressure. The HOA wouldn't just back down. They were going to fight for every inch. And when they did, the wife would be ready to take them on again, this time, with the full weight of the law and the community behind her. The days following the military's intervention were filled with tension. The HOA had underestimated the resolve of the man and his wife, and now they were facing the consequences of their greed. The construction site remained locked down, and despite their best efforts, the HOA couldn't push forward with their plans. But Richard Allen and the board members weren't the type to back down easily. They had far too much invested in the project to let it fail now. The phone rang again one morning, and the wife immediately recognized Richard's number. She hesitated for only a moment before picking up the call. "You've made your point," Richard said, his voice seething with frustration. "But enough is enough. We're not going to let you ruin this for everyone. We'll go to court if we have to, but you won't win." The wife's expression remained calm, though her pulse quickened. She had been waiting for this. "You're the one who started this fight, Richard. You're the one who sold my land without my permission, and now you're trying to push through a project that only benefits you. You're not going to win, because you've crossed a line. This isn't just about a development anymore. It's about right and wrong." Richard's response was immediate, full of venom. "You're a fool if you think the community is going to stand behind you. They want the cabins. They want the development. You're a roadblock, and you'll be removed." The wife could hear the fury in his voice. It was clear that the pressure was starting to get to him. "You're not the only one who's losing control here, Richard," she said calmly. "The community isn't behind you anymore. You've manipulated them for years, but now they're seeing who you really are." Richard's silence spoke volumes. He was furious, and he knew it. He had no more options left. But that didn't stop him from trying one last time to regain control. "You think the military will protect you forever?" he spat. "You think you can hold us off with a few trucks and some legal threats? We have the backing of every important person in this town. You'll lose, just like everyone else who's tried to stand in our way." The wife didn't flinch. "The military is only the beginning, Richard. We've already won, and I'm going to make sure that everyone sees the truth about what you've done." She could hear Richard's breath heavy on the other end, a sign that he was no longer in control of the situation. "You'll regret this," he muttered before hanging up. The wife put the phone down and turned to her husband, who had been listening from the other room. "He's panicking," she said quietly, a smile tugging at her lips. "He knows he's losing." "Good," her husband replied, his voice calm but filled with the same determination. "But this is far from over." The wife nodded. They weren't going to stop until they had made sure the HOA couldn't continue their exploitation. Over the next few days, they continued to apply pressure, gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, and working with the media. The community, once divided, was now united in their efforts to push back against the HOA. The more the HOA tried to silence them, the louder their voices became. They had become a movement, and Richard Allen and his team had no idea what was coming. One morning, the wife received an unexpected visit from a local journalist who had been covering the HOA's development project. He had uncovered some startling information, documents showing that the HOA had falsified permits, bribed city officials, and ignored zoning laws to push through their plans. The wife was stunned, but she knew this was the ammunition they needed. It wasn't just about the dam anymore. It was about exposing the corruption of the HOA to the public. They had the evidence now, and it was time to turn the tables once and for all. The wife organized a press conference, bringing together the community and the media to confront the HOA publicly. As she stood in front of the microphone, she looked out at the sea of reporters, cameras flashing, and felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This was it, the final showdown. "For too long, the HOA has exploited this community," she began, her voice strong and unwavering. "They've taken land from homeowners, ignored the needs of the people, and used their power to control everything. But no more. Today, we stand united against them." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We've gathered evidence of their corruption, and we will not rest until they are held accountable. This project will not continue, and we will ensure that the people who have suffered under their control will get the justice they deserve." The room fell silent as the press absorbed her words. The tension was palpable. This wasn't just about stopping a construction project anymore. This was about dismantling an entire system of corruption and greed. As the press conference ended, the wife felt a surge of triumph. The HOA had tried to silence her, to push her aside, but now their secrets were out in the open. Richard Allen and the board members had no more moves left. The community was awake now, and they were ready to fight back. The battle had shifted. The HOA was no longer in control, and it was only a matter of time before they were forced to back down. The wife looked at her husband, a quiet smile on her face. "It's over for them," she said softly. "They won't recover from this." Her husband nodded. "We've done it. We've taken control." The fight wasn't over, but they had won the war. The HOA had no more power, no more influence, and the community would never let them take what was rightfully theirs again. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and the tension in the air was thicker than ever. The wife and her husband stood at the edge of their property, watching as the community gathered together for one final push against the HOA. The battle had been long, and they had fought hard, but this was the moment when everything would come to a head. Richard Allen and the HOA board had made one final attempt to intimidate the residents, sending a legal team to try and prevent the press from covering the event. But it was too late. The community had already united, and there was no turning back now. The press was already there, cameras rolling, reporters asking questions, and the residents standing behind the wife. She had spoken with the media several times over the past few weeks, but today, the fight would be taken to another level. The wife stepped forward, her voice strong as she addressed the crowd. "We've been fighting for our homes, our rights, and our community," she began. "The HOA has lied, they've manipulated, and they've ignored the people who built this neighborhood. Today, we stand together to take back what was stolen from us." The crowd erupted into applause, their energy contagious. The wife felt a surge of power. She wasn't just standing for her family anymore. She was standing for every person who had ever been silenced by the HOA. "The HOA thought they could buy and sell our homes without consequence," she continued. "But today, we show them that we won't back down. We've exposed their corruption, their greed, and their abuse of power. And now, we demand justice." Richard Allen, along with the HOA board members, arrived at the scene just as the wife finished speaking. He was flanked by his lawyers, his face tight with anger and frustration. The wife could see the fear in his eyes, and it gave her strength. He wasn't in control anymore. He knew that. "This has gone too far," Richard said, stepping up to the microphone, his voice forced and filled with disdain. "You've caused unnecessary chaos in this neighborhood. You've manipulated the media and the public. You're making a fool of yourselves." The wife didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "You're the one making a fool of yourself, Richard. You've tried to tear this community apart for profit, and now everyone can see who you really are. You can't intimidate us anymore." The media cameras clicked, and the atmosphere shifted. Richard's attempt to undermine the community fell flat. He could feel the pressure mounting as the public turned against him. The wife had made sure that every reporter had the evidence, the documents showing the HOA's illegal activities, the financial records linking them to bribery, the permits they had falsified to get their way. As Richard stood there, realizing he was losing the battle, the wife turned to face the crowd once more. "This isn't just about our homes. It's about taking control back from people like him, people who think they can manipulate us for their own gain. We won't allow this kind of corruption in our community any longer." The residents cheered, and Richard's face twisted in frustration. He couldn't win this fight. The press had already started to report on his shady dealings, and the momentum had shifted completely. "You think you've won?" Richard spat, his voice seething. "You'll never stop this. We'll find a way around you, and this project will go through." But the wife was ready. "You don't get to make decisions for this community anymore. You're done, Richard. The public knows the truth, and your development plans are officially over." At that moment, the wife received a call from her lawyer. She picked up the phone, her eyes never leaving Richard. "Yes. We've just received a ruling from the court," the lawyer said. "The judge has ruled in your favor. The HOA is required to halt all construction immediately. They're being forced to return the land to the community, and the permits they obtained through illegal means have been revoked." The wife smiled and hung up the phone, her voice steady as she spoke to Richard. "It's over. You've lost." Richard's face went pale as the weight of the situation sank in. The court had ruled against him, the media had exposed him, and the community had stood united against his greed. There was nowhere left for him to turn. He was defeated. The wife stood tall, her heart swelling with pride. They had fought not just for their home, but for every person who had ever been wronged by the HOA. The community had come together, and in the end, they had won. Richard turned and walked away, his head down, defeated. The HOA was no longer a threat. The community was free. As the crowd erupted into applause, the wife stood with her husband, their hands clasped together, knowing they had not only won their fight but had made sure the HOA would never again have the power to destroy people's lives. The battle was over, and they had emerged victorious. The man and his wife had reclaimed what was theirs. And as they looked around at the community they had fought to protect, they knew that together, they had made a real difference.